Christmas of 2019 was the year me and my two best friends, Mark and Tyler, decided to rent a cabin instead of doing the usual family stuff. We were all in our early 20s, living far from our families, all kind of burnt out from work, and honestly the idea of lying around for a few days doing absolutely nothing sounded perfect. The cabin we found was about an hour outside of town, tucked halfway in the woods, but still technically in a neighborhood, if 10 other cabins spaced a mile apart counts as one. We got there on Christmas Eve, bringing tons of food, snacks, and beer, and Mark even brought over his Xbox. So we drank and played video games until 2 in the morning. It wasn't exactly a Hallmark holiday, but it was definitely fun. By the time we all went to our rooms to go to bed, I passed out almost immediately. The place was freezing, and the cabin creaked like every other old wooden building, but I was tired enough that none of it mattered, at least until I woke up. It was probably 3 or 4 in the morning, still pitch black outside. I didn't know what time it was exactly, but I knew I'd been asleep for a while, and that something woke me up. Soft, slow footsteps from the main living area. Not walking normally, more like someone taking careful steps, trying not to wake anyone. I blinked a few times, half asleep, and figured it had to be one of the guys, maybe getting water or using the bathroom. I laid there listening, waiting for the footsteps to go down the hall or to the bathroom door. But the sound just stayed in the same area, the creaking boards near the front of the cabin, almost pacing. I wanted to call out and ask if everything was okay, but I didn't feel like yelling from a dark room or going out there and startling them. Eventually, the footsteps stopped. The cabin settled back into silence. I rolled over and fell asleep again. When I finally got up in the morning, sunlight was coming in through the big living room windows, and the guys were already in the living room. First thing I did was jokingly ask who was creeping around at 4 in the morning. I expected some stupid answer from one of them about losing their phone while drunk or something. I don't know. But both of them gave me the exact same confused look. Mark said, "Dude, we all went to bed at 2. And Tyler shook his head, saying he didn't get up once. I laughed it off at first. I figured maybe I'd imagined it, or dreamed the sound and mistaken it as real. But then I glanced over toward the front door. The lock was undone. Not just the deadbolt, the handle lock too, fully unlocked. The door was still shut, but the locks weren't turned. I asked if either of them had gone outside this morning. They both said no, and when I pointed out the door, I saw both of their faces fall flat, as we all kind of realized I might have actually heard someone last night. I mean, we were all fairly sure that we had locked the door. But after a minute of thinking about it, Tyler said maybe the wind shook it loose, or maybe the old door just didn't latch right. You know, the usual excuses people make when they don't want to consider anything else. I think it was because all of us wanted to believe that it was nothing, that we eventually just let it go. We ate breakfast, bundled up in our winter coats because it was still absolutely freezing in the cabin, and spent the afternoon hanging around, playing video games, watching movies, and just having a good time. We also handed out small crappy gifts we'd gotten each other for Christmas, and spent some time FaceTiming our families. It was snowing too much, and way too cold to spend any time outside, even though we all had wanted to go hiking while we were up at the cabin. Over the course of the day, the whole creaking and unlocked door incident faded into just an odd mystery. But as it got later, I guess I started to get a weird gut feeling. We were all in the living room, playing some dumb party game on the Xbox, laughing and yelling at each other. and every so often I'd catch myself glancing toward the window. I hadn't noticed it much before, but now the blackness outside felt too close. Like someone standing just a few feet back could watch us clearly, while we'd never see them. I knew during the day there were some trees just outside of that window, like literally 10 feet away, and yet it was too dark to even see that. I didn't want to mention the bad feeling I had because I didn't want to kill the mood, especially when I really didn't have a reason to feel the way I did. I never actually saw anything. Because we had stayed up so late last night, we only stayed up until around 12 a.m. when Mark decided to head to bed early. Me and Tyler stayed in the living room for another 30 minutes chatting before both also going to bed. I laid in bed awake for a while. Hard to tell the time just sitting there, but it felt like an hour-ish. There were no curtains or blinds, so the window next to my bed made me feel really uneasy. And then I heard it again. The soft, quiet footsteps at the front of the cabin in the living room. I sat up and listened as intently as I could. I knew this time that it wasn't one of my friends, because I would have heard them leave their rooms and walk down the hallway. So really, I was just listening to see if it was just the house creaking, or if it was actually a person. And after a while of listening, I was absolutely sure that what I was hearing were footsteps. And with whoever it was just pacing around the room, I finally decided to get up and maybe try confronting them. But as I walked over to the bedroom door, suddenly the footsteps moved from the living room to the hallway. They got closer and closer, walking all the way down, passing by my door, and going toward what I think was Mark's room. And then it was quiet. I didn't hear anything for several long seconds. I very quietly grabbed the door handle and pushed my door open just slightly enough to peek out into the hallway, not making a sound. I saw a large man. I mean, like maybe 6'5" or taller, with long hair and a thick beard. He was standing still, facing Mark's bedroom door, and just standing there motionless in the dark. I didn't risk looking for too long and moved away, but left the door cracked open still because I didn't want it to make a click sound if I closed it. And at this point, I didn't know what to do. I froze up, unsure how to get us out of this situation. But just 20 seconds later, I heard a slight creak in the hallway, and before I could even react, my door was suddenly pushed open. The man stood in the doorway, staring at me with wide open eyes and an emotionless face. I yelled at the top of my lungs, and the dude didn't even flinch. Before I knew it, Mark and Tyler came running out of their rooms, and I couldn't see much, but Tyler immediately saw the guy and tried to stop him. But this dude was huge, and basically just slammed Tyler against the wall and threw him to the floor. And Mark was probably just frozen still after seeing that. But then the guy ran off. Didn't try fighting all of us. He just took off out of the cabin and, from what we could tell, into the forest. We quickly locked up the place and called the police. It took over 20 minutes, and the whole time we were anticipating the man coming back. All of us were holding whatever temporary weapons we could find, like kitchen knives and the iron fireplace rod. But he didn't come back. Really, we got no answers, and most of the situation fell onto the owner of the cabin, as he was the one who had his cabin broken into. What that man wanted from us or from the cabin, we don't know. From our few theories though, the one that stands out to me is that he might have been there looking for the owner and not knowing it was a rental. It would explain him staring at me and seeing all of us and not really bothering with doing anything afterward. But again, it really is just a theory. He just as likely could have been there to harm us and just saw it was 3 people and decided to run. Whatever the case, we're all just glad it didn't come down to an all-out fight, because I genuinely don't know who would have won in the end. This happened in winter, right around Christmas time. I live with my girlfriend, who I'll name as Sarah, and being that we lived pretty far from our families, we almost always went on road trips around the holidays. This year, we were going to Sarah's family's home for Christmas. The drive was just under 11 hours. Usually this drive wasn't too bad, but maybe we just gotten lucky the years before. We packed and shoved all our bags and suitcases into the trunk, then left for the road trip on Christmas Eve, hoping to make it there at night and have all of Christmas Day with her family. First couple of hours were quiet. Think a lot of people had already done their driving for the holiday, so the roads weren't crowded. Eventually, I pulled off at a small gas station to top off the tank and just take a break for a minute before continuing the drive. There wasn't a single other car there. Sarah waited inside the car with the heat on, while I ran inside to pay for the gas and grab us some drinks. The wind was harsh and cold, and the lot hadn't been plowed yet, so there was basically half a foot of snow I had to run through just to get up to the building. I opened the door and walked in, and right away I noticed how quiet it was. I didn't see anyone. I looked around for a second, but figured they were probably in the back or something, and would come out once I was ready. I grabbed a couple of drinks and walked up to the counter, but nobody came up. I called out hello and tried just peeking into the back room, but I didn't see anyone, or even hear anyone. I think the place was actually empty, even though the doors were unlocked and the lights were on. It was strange, but after a couple of minutes, I just put the drinks away and went back outside to hopefully at least be able to use the gas pump. As soon as I stepped out, I saw a guy standing at my girlfriend's window. Looked like he was trying to talk to her, knocking on the window and looking in. He was bundled up in heavy winter clothing, so aside from what he was wearing, I couldn't get a good look at him. I started hurrying over, but as soon as he saw me, he backed up and started quickly walking away. I got up to the car and watched as he continued walking down to the road. He clearly wasn't the missing worker at the gas station, so now I was even more concerned. I got in and asked Sarah what that guy was doing. She seemed a little flustered. She said he came up out of nowhere as soon as I walked in, and all the guy was saying was to roll down the window, constantly knocking on it. He didn't say why or really anything else. Obviously, she found it very creepy and had a bad feeling about it, so she kept the doors and windows locked and didn't respond to him. I didn't even bother staying. I turned on the car and drove out of there, hoping we'd reach another gas station along the way. That place just had an unnerving feeling to it, and neither of us wanted to be there a second longer. Unfortunately, because of that whole thing, we ended up having to take a detour to a different gas station, because along our main route, the next one was too far, and would have risked us running out of fuel in the middle of nowhere and in the freezing cold. And it became pretty clear that things were not going to work out the way we wanted. With the detour and the snow slowing us down, we were way behind. It was well into the night already, and we were still 4 hours away. Both of us were tired and figured we could stop at a cheap motel to sleep at for a few hours and just arrive at the house early on Christmas morning instead. Sarah called her family to let them know, and I found a motel just on the side of the highway, a few miles down. The 24/7 motel sign was still on, but the parking lot was empty. I mean, Christmas Eve night is an odd one to spend at a motel. I pulled in and walked up to the door, feeling relieved to see a clerk inside. I got a small room for the night and headed back out to get our travel bags and get us into the room. We were exhausted and pretty much passed out within 30 minutes of getting inside. I set an alarm for 2 a.m. so that we could get up and make it to our family's house by 6 a.m. I think both of us slept like rocks. I never woke up once during the 5-ish hours we were sleeping. When my alarm went off, I groggily got up, not even wanting to get out of bed. I let Sarah sleep in for a bit while I packed what little we had, then went outside and tossed all the stuff in the back seat. It still looked like nobody else had come by the motel at night. It was incredibly cold, and the wind was awful. It wasn't even snowing that hard, but the wind was blowing all the snow dust up from the ground, making it hard to see. I ran back in and told Sarah it was time to go, then headed back to the front of the building to check us out of the room. I walked into the small office room where the clerk was, but they weren't there. I stood still for a moment, feeling the deja vu of what had happened at the gas station, but this time, obviously, I had seen them earlier. I took a few more steps closer to the desk, and again called out, but still nobody was there. However, I saw a bunch of papers all over the floor behind the desk. It looked like the worker had left in a hurry. I felt this really bad feeling start coming over me as I backed away and ran back out to get Sarah. I sprinted down the row of room doors, opening ours and telling Sarah we had to leave right now. She hurried out and into the car while I grabbed what was left, and then also got in. I noticed my hands were shaking as I turned it on, and was just barely able to get the car going through the snow-covered parking lot. It was as I was pulling back onto the highway that I passed the side of the building and just caught sight of a man on the side of it. Even from that quick glimpse, I saw it was the same guy from the gas station, same winter coat and everything. Knowing something was definitely wrong, I got onto the highway and Sarah called 911. We met officers at a gas station 15 minutes away, and this is where it got a lot more disturbing and creepy. One of the officers brought up how impossible it was that the random guy could have been following us without us noticing. And sure enough, he found a tracker stuck right under the back wheel well on our car. The guy must have stuck it there when he went up to our car at the gas station. It took over an hour for separate officers to go to the gas station and the motel, and me and Sarah went pale when they reported back that both workers were confirmed missing. So obviously this guy that was following us had something to do with it. My guess is that he had done something to the worker at the gas station before we arrived, and then when I got there, maybe he thought I saw something that I shouldn't have. So he followed us to probably get rid of us too. Can't say for sure, because they never found the guy. Only evidence was a blurry image from a gas station CCTV camera. It definitely was the most unsettling way to spend our Christmas morning. And really, we were thinking about it for the entire holiday week, but ultimately, that seemed to be the end of it. After that week, we got no updates on anything. Unfortunately, I haven't heard anything back about either the gas station worker or the motel worker, so I think it's safe to assume they're both still missing, which makes it even more eerie to think that both me and Sarah could have been still missing as well, had we not gotten out of there. This was 2016. Because of my work and where my family lived, and a bunch of scheduling things, this was one of the few times I spent Christmas alone. I had a nice, small house in a good neighborhood, and although being alone on the holiday wasn't great, I still enjoyed the day, either just staying in watching Christmas movies or going for walks around the neighborhood if the weather was decent. That year, Christmas Day started calm. I woke up to quiet snow falling outside, not a full storm yet. I made coffee, put Home Alone on in the background, and ate breakfast on the couch. It was honestly kind of nice. Around noon, the snow started picking up a little, but nowhere near blizzard levels. I decided to go for a quick walk anyway, before it was too late. The neighborhood had the whole holiday feeling to it, with lights on the houses, wreaths on the door, and no cars on the road. Just a calm, empty, quiet neighborhood. I only saw one other person on the whole walk, a guy shoveling his driveway 2 streets over. Other than that, it was quiet. When I got home, though, the wind was starting to build, blowing snow in little spirals across the street. I figured the forecast had been right about the storm coming in the evening, but I didn't mind. I had food, blankets, and movies, so I was all set to stay in. The storm hit faster than expected. Around 5, it went from snowy to whiteout in under 30 minutes. The wind started shaking the windows. Not enough for me to worry, but enough to remind me that I probably shouldn't go outside again. And with all that noise outside, the house almost felt extra quiet. I made dinner and kept watching movies. By 8, though, the storm had gotten bad enough it was drowning out the TV. I could hear things thumping around outside, branches or maybe loose Christmas decorations. At the time, I didn't think too much of it. It was about an hour later, so around 9, when I heard the first knock. Not loud or frantic, just a single knock on the front door, sharp enough to cut through the wind and definitely be a knock, not a thump like I'd been hearing. I froze on the couch. No one ever came to my door on Christmas, and no one should have been out in that weather anyway. I muted the TV and waited, listening. For a long moment, there was nothing but the storm. Then another knock, 3 this time. I got up and walked toward the door, but not close enough for anyone outside to be able to see me through the side window. I didn't say anything, didn't move the blinds either. I just listened. My door didn't have one of those holes you could look through. It just had the side windows, which, of course, if I looked through, then whoever was out there would also see me. I stood there until my nerves started catching up with me. I really couldn't hear much of anything over the storm, but whoever it was didn't knock again, and I figured I should probably just leave it. There was no way I was going to answer the door anyway. Eventually, I went back to the couch, still tense but trying to brush it off. I turned the movie back on, but it only took about 5 minutes for me to hear something else. I quickly paused the TV and listened. It was very faint, but sounded like something being dragged through the snow, slowly moving from the front door all the way around the house. I followed the sound with my eyes until it went up to the back door and stopped. There was no curtain or anything covering that door, so I was hesitant to even peer around the corner and look. But then there were those 3 knocks again. I almost couldn't believe it. I stood up and tried to slowly lean around the corner and look at the back door. Instantly, I saw a pair of eyes piercing in at me. It was so dark, though, I could only barely see the man before I moved back out of sight. What the hell was he doing here? I felt this was enough to call 911, even if nothing else happened, because of how creepy this was. I got my phone and got on the line with an operator. I still stayed in the living room, though, honestly just too scared to move and be seen by the man again. Something about the look in his eyes was horrifying. I think I was standing there on the phone for 2 to 3 minutes, when suddenly there was a slight scraping sound, and before I could even think of what it was, there was a sudden loud crash against the back door. I heard the glass shatter, and parts of the door slamming and falling onto the floor. The wind instantly flooded the house and covered up any other sounds I could have heard. I assumed the man got inside the house, but I couldn't hear any footsteps or anything, and there was no way I was going to look over there. I quickly hid behind the couch. Not the best hiding spot, but I didn't know what else to do. The fact that I couldn't see anything and couldn't hear anything other than the heavy winds made the next 5 minutes excruciatingly anxious and tense. I knew the man had to be walking around looking for me, or maybe stealing stuff from my house, but I didn't dare try looking. And then, finally, I heard knocks at the front door and a police officer's voice call out through the wind. I got up and sprinted to the door, letting the officer in. But the man was already gone. There were wet shoe prints going throughout parts of the house. I don't know if he was looking for me or what, but it seemed like after breaking in and barely searching, he just left. His shoe prints in the snow went toward the field in the backyard and were covered up by the blizzard within minutes. Even after the police left, I didn't sleep. I just sat on the edge of my bed with every light in the house on, listening to the wind rattle what was left of the back door. At some point, the storm let up, but the silence that followed felt even worse. Every creak in the house made me flinch. The officers returned when the sun came up to take another look. They told me they'd patrol the area for a while, but with the storm burying everything, there wasn't much else they could do. Before they left, one of them said something I still think about sometimes. He told me that with storms like that, it wasn't uncommon for people to wander, looking for unlocked houses, knowing the blizzard would cover their traces. But I mentioned the knocking and how he circled my home. The officer just shook his head. He said that some people test the doors first to see who answers, or if anyone does. So by not answering the first time, and then showing myself to him at the back door, if he was trying to find out whether I was alone, I basically gave him the answer. I never really realized how every small choice I made that night sort of led to what ended up happening. I just got insanely lucky that the man wasn't more determined to find me, because I can only imagine how things would have ended if he did. I was spending the weekend alone at my cabin-style house on the edge of town. It wasn't isolated in the middle of nowhere. There were other houses around, but they were spaced out enough that you could go days without seeing anyone around. I never got visitors, like solicitors or neighbors. The houses in this neighborhood were the kind people drove past without even thinking about it, because unless you looked intently, you probably just saw an endless forest of trees. It was winter, right after a heavy snowfall, so everything felt quieter than usual. A thick blanket of snow covered the whole area, and the woods behind my house looked deeper and darker than they usually did. I didn't mind being alone out there for the most part. The house was cozy, with lots of big windows, a stone fireplace, and just overall that nice cabin feeling. It was the whole reason I moved there. The first night, nothing weird happened until late. I stayed up watching YouTube videos in the living room, kind of half asleep by midnight. After a while, I turned off the TV and headed to my room. It was a one-story home, so my bedroom sat right at the end of the hallway. The thing about the bedroom is that it matched the rest of the home, having these massive floor-to-ceiling windows along the wall, and even a sliding glass door that opened toward the woods. Because the home was in a private location, with just the woods on all sides and no close neighbors, it made sense, I guess. But it did feel strange sometimes. Even just seeing my reflection in the glass at night would startle me, thinking someone was standing out there. But this night was different. As I turned off the lights and crawled into bed, I heard something. This soft cracking sound coming from outside, not like an animal or the typical forest noise. This was louder, like someone stepping on a thick branch. A couple seconds later, it happened again. I sat up and looked toward the large window. Because the lights were off in my room, I could see outside through the glass pretty well. I stared for maybe 30 seconds before something moved in the solid darkness between the tall pine trees. Not a shape I could describe, just a quick shift of a shadow between two trees, like someone leaned out of view or leaned into view. I couldn't tell. Everything was still after that. After minutes of waiting and staring out there, feeling nerves building up in me, I started to think I might have just imagined it, like my eyes were just seeing shapes in the dark. But I didn't move for a long time. Eventually, though, I got up and double-checked the sliding door was locked, then got back in bed. After that, it took me forever to fall asleep. Every 30 seconds, I felt like I had to open my eyes and look out the window again. But every time, I saw nothing. The next day was strange. Nothing outright happened, but everything felt off in a way I couldn't explain. I'd constantly get that subtle, uneasy feeling, like someone was standing just out of sight, staring in. I kept glancing at whatever window was behind me, half expecting to see eyes looking in. I never did, but the feeling didn't go away. As it got later and became dark again, snow began coming down again, which eased my senses a bit. I think it made it even more unlikely anyone would be outside lurking around when it was cold and snowy, so I tried not to overthink. Around 10, I was watching TV in the living room, wrapped up in a blanket by the fireplace. The glow of the TV screen lit up most of the house, so I didn't even realize how dark it was inside until I left the couch to get a soda. And as I walked through the main hallway, I noticed the light in the far room, the small den with bookshelves, was off. I could have sworn I left it on earlier. I usually always kept it on because it provided a nice ambient light, so the house didn't feel like a shadowy cave. I went over and quickly flipped the light back on, figuring nothing of it, and getting my soda and sitting back down. I was maybe back on the couch for a minute, having just unpaused the TV, when I happened to glance over my shoulder. I wasn't even trying to check anything. It was just one of those automatic glances you do for no reason. But the light in the room was off again. I could feel the blood rush from my face. I stood up and walked down the hallway, just enough to see the switch from where I was standing. The switch was in the off position, physically flipped down. I just stared at it. Someone was in that room, and it was like they were trying to lure me in there. I started to back away. My phone was charging on the nightstand in my room, and my car keys were by the front door. I knew I needed to get both and leave immediately. I quietly moved to the other hallway and into my bedroom, grabbing my phone, but not before seeing something shift behind the glass. I looked up, and at first all I saw were faint footprints going through the snow behind the window, until it led my eyes to a large figure. A man, standing just a couple feet behind the window. He was entirely covered by the dark, but I knew he was looking in at me. I sprinted back down the hall toward the front door, getting my keys, and hearing not one but two sets of footsteps on the other side of the house. I opened the door and ran to the side driveway, where my car was. As soon as I got in, I saw that same figure come barreling around the house and running toward my car. I turned it on and fled for the main road, seeing his figure standing where my car just came from and watching me drive away. It took a little over 30 minutes for officers to arrive on my property. What they found was horrifying. Multiple windows were shattered, and the whole house looked like it had been destroyed on the inside. Doors and cabinets ripped from their hinges, furniture flipped over, indents and tears in the walls. I told the police that I'd heard 2 people inside and saw 1 man outside, but the condition they left the house in, it was impossible to know how the 2 got in quietly while I was at home all day. I stayed in a hotel for weeks after that, getting the house repaired and putting it up for sale. I couldn't get over the feeling of knowing 3 people had been stalking me for who knows how long. And had I not escaped, I can't even imagine the horrible, disturbing things that would have happened that night. Even now, I have nightmares of me in that hallway, walking toward the room with the light off, knowing what was waiting for me just outside of view of the doorway. My name is Noah, and I'm 36. I'm gonna have to run you through a bit of backstory just to give context for why I live where I do. 2 years before this happened, me and my wife broke up just a few months after buying a house together. It wasn't a bad breakup, and we technically didn't divorce until months later, but I digress. The house we bought was massive, like way too big for even the both of us, but it was supposed to be something we could grow into and maybe have kids and dogs and whatever in the future. After we split ways, it was left for me to figure out whether to sell it for a loss or just continue living in it. I chose to stay. So I lived alone in that house for 2 whole years. I told myself I'd find a way to use the space. Like, since I worked from home, maybe I'd use a room for my office, and then have a workout room and a bedroom, all separate so that it wasn't all that empty. But I never really got around to it. The entire huge house was mostly left hollow and vacant. If you opened a random door, there's a good chance nothing would be behind it but a dusty, unused room. I wouldn't even go into half the rooms for months at a time. I didn't mind it too much, but occasionally I'd get that uneasy feeling of being alone in a giant, empty house. That, mixed with just overall loneliness, I finally decided to do something I'd been wanting to do for years, and adopt a dog from a shelter. That's when all of this started. I found a small 8-month-old puppy named Piper. She was a beagle, and I picked her up after work from a shelter about 3 hours away from me. So by the time I'd gotten home, it was around 8 p.m. I let her roam around the yard for a bit, then showed her inside to let her explore her new home. In the shelter, Piper was very excited and happy and energetic, and even on the car ride home. But as soon as I let her inside, she became very timid. I thought she was just unfamiliar with the home, and all the change was making her anxious, so I didn't think too much into it. I left her alone to explore, and sat on the couch to give her space. She spent all but 2 minutes walking around, before jumping up on the couch with me, huddling up right on my lap. She almost seemed afraid of something. But again, I had every reason to believe it was all just normal behavior of a new pup moving into a new home. Later, I brought her upstairs and we went to bed. In the morning, everything seemed a little better. She followed me around while I made breakfast and coffee, then sat below my office desk while I worked for the day. However, a few hours in, she got up and walked toward the doorway, standing halfway in the hall, looking very alert. Then, after a few seconds, she fully left the room, and I could hear her nails clicking on the floor, walking down the hallway toward the staircase. I thought she finally felt comfortable enough to look around, so I left her alone and kept working. I want to say 10 minutes went by, when suddenly she started barking like crazy from somewhere downstairs. I jumped up from the desk and quickly hurried through the hallway and down the steps, still with her barks echoing all throughout the home, down every corridor, making it hard to even tell where she was. I called out her name and moved through all the rooms before finding her. Strangely, Piper was standing right in the middle of one of the empty rooms downstairs. Like she was just standing, looking at the wall and barking. Once she saw me, she hurried over and stood right next to me, tail down and looking nervously at the empty room. I walked in, and there was nothing to look at or make sense of. It was entirely empty. I tried to calm her down, picking her up and closing the door to the room. I brought her back upstairs to the office, and after a few minutes, I continued working. Rest of that day, not much happened. When I finished work, I took her for a walk around the area. Then we spent the night watching TV, going upstairs and getting in bed at 10. But in the middle of the night, I woke up. Not to a noise or anything. I guess just a feeling. I sat up and saw Piper standing right up to the bedroom door, her ears up and her gaze locked on the gap in the doorway. I called her name, but she didn't move. And honestly, I'm not entirely sure how or why, but I laid back down and fell asleep without a second thought. Can't even believe I managed to, now that I'm thinking back on it. I guess I really just thought she was uncomfortable being in a new place. But I woke up in the morning and things seemed to be okay. Piper was up on the bed with me and didn't act strange at all. I got dressed and headed downstairs, letting her outside and doing my typical morning routine. When she came back in, we both headed upstairs to my desk. Just like the day before, she laid down right under my desk while I worked. I made sure to check on her a few times, looking under the desk at her, and every time she was just sleeping, so I kept working. Think it wasn't until almost 6 o'clock, when I was just about done with work and the sun had mostly gone down, that I looked under my desk again, and she wasn't there. I looked around the room, and she was just gone. Must have slipped out without me noticing. I closed my laptop and got up, calling Piper's name as I walked into the hallway. But I didn't hear anything. Didn't hear her walking around or barking or anything at all. The house was dead silent. Piper? Piper, where you at? My voice echoed through the house. I felt something unnerving come over me as I started walking down the hall and down to the first floor. There were no signs of her. It was so quiet I could hear my own heart beating. I walked down the next hallway, leading to the room I found her in yesterday. As I got closer, I noticed the door wasn't fully closed. It was cracked open, which I was sure I hadn't left it like that. I pushed it further open. Piper was sitting in the far corner of the room, shivering and facing the doorway I was in. She looked terrified, like something else was in the house with us. It gave me a sense to turn around before approaching her, and when I checked behind me, I barely caught a glimpse of someone peering down the hallway back by the stairs. I quickly backed into the room and slammed the door, locking it and moving toward Piper. A few seconds later, quiet footsteps started coming down the hallway. He came right up to the other side of the door. Piper began quietly whimpering, still huddled in the corner, staring at the door. I was honestly too scared to even move. I just stood there, in the middle of the room, waiting for something to happen. The person behind the door didn't move either for a while, before they started quietly walking back down the hallway. It was almost terrifying how confident it felt they were, not running or anything. Felt like they weren't fazed by anything going on, or that this was exactly what they wanted, which made me wonder what it was exactly they were here for. I didn't hear anything after that. I think I stayed in that room with Piper for 30 minutes. I just couldn't get myself to move. When I eventually opened the door, I looked down the unlit hallway and all the way at the end, I could see the front door was wide open. Hoping it meant whoever that was gone, I ran back upstairs to get my phone and call the cops. While I was up there, I noticed several open doors that, again, I had always kept closed. As soon as I got my phone, I ran back down to Piper and held up inside that room until police made it. They searched, not only inside, but also several acres around the house, but found nothing. No signs of the intruder still being around. However, they did find signs of him having been in my home. In one of the rooms upstairs, the one right next to my office, there were a bunch of random items suggesting that someone had been living there, maybe for months. And worse yet, it seemed like the person had likely been spending the days sleeping in the closet, so I wouldn't notice or hear them, and would then come out at night to leave and re-enter the home or to hang around inside the house. Of course, bringing Piper into my home, she could probably sense someone else was inside with us. Makes me think of when I woke up in the middle of the night finding Piper staring at the door. He could have been walking around right outside the bedroom. And as for the room she was barking at the wall or ceiling in, it was the room directly below the one the person was using as their hideout. She might have heard them move around up there or something. After it was all said and done, this event was enough to get me to finally sell the house and move into something smaller, bringing Piper with, of course. She's absolutely the best companion I ever could have asked for, and since moving, she's been just as happy and excited as she was when I found her at the shelter, and hasn't been anxious in the slightest. I still worry about the person not being found though, and would come back. I know it's unlikely, but I think I'll never really forget about it. I was 18, still living with my parents, but because I was old enough, they could leave me home alone without it being a problem. This was one of the times where my parents were gone for I think a couple of days. Our home wasn't anything special, really just a typical neighborhood home in the suburbs. And as far as these sort of days go, I usually just sat around the house and watched TV or played video games. I didn't have my own car, so unless I felt like walking 30 minutes for some fast food, I had no reason to leave the house. In the morning, I pretty much just stayed in bed for a few hours watching TV, then finally got up to start my day, heading downstairs to the kitchen. Almost as soon as I got downstairs and started making breakfast, my friend sent me a text. I assumed he was just waiting for me to get online, so I finished making breakfast before even checking it. But when I did finally open it, I was a little confused. He said, "Who's the guy outside your house?" I genuinely was caught off guard by that. I responded, "What?" and went to the front window to look, but nobody was out there. No cars, no people, just an empty, quiet neighborhood. My friend's house was directly across from mine, and I didn't see him in the window or anything, so I was confused. After a minute, I decided to just call him, figuring it was some stupid joke he was trying to pull. He was the kind of friend to say stupid stuff like this sometimes, to mess with me, but this time I really didn't see where the joke in it was. He answered, and didn't even try to play it as a joke. He was serious, saying he actually saw some guy outside my house that he'd never seen before, and the only reason he even mentioned it was because the guy seemed like he was trying to look into the windows. That was super weird, but neither of us could figure out who it was or what he was doing, and with him not there anymore, we kind of just moved on from it and hopped on a Discord call to play video games for a few hours. I only went downstairs once during that time to refill my water, and I did a quick look out the window again, not seeing anyone. We were online until probably 5 or 6 before getting off the call. All I remember was that it was already dark outside, and I realized how much time had passed. I got up and went downstairs. I started making a quick dinner, unsure how I'd spend the rest of my night. Probably just watch TV in my room. But while I was in the kitchen cooking, I saw a shadow move or flicker on the wall in front of me. I immediately turned around. I saw nothing, no movement or anything in the living room that could have moved, until I saw the window. I walked up to it and looked out. It was dark and still. I didn't see anyone. The image of someone possibly staring at me from outside gave me chills though, but I thought I was probably just on edge. I mean, the shadow I saw could have been a car passing by or something. I was sure it was nothing to worry about. I finished making dinner and went upstairs to my room to eat, then laid in bed and watched TV. I was up there for at least an hour, maybe a little more, just zoning out and half watching whatever was on. At some point, as it got later and darker in my room, I realized I hadn't turned on any of the lights upstairs. It was just the TV lighting up my room, and I kept finding my eyes shifting and looking at the crack under the bedroom door, seeing it was completely dark in the hallway outside my room. Usually that would never bother me, but this night it just felt off. Eventually, I paused the show and decided to get up and grab a snack from downstairs, though it was more of an excuse to go around and turn all the lights on as well, and hopefully shake whatever feeling I had. As soon as I opened my bedroom door though, the feeling grew worse. It felt like the house was too quiet, and the hallway was eerily dark. I flicked on the light, seeing it was just an empty hallway, and feeling silly or almost annoyed with myself for being creeped out. I headed downstairs. Before getting a snack, I checked out the windows. This paranoia I was feeling wasn't something I think I'd ever felt before, at least not to this degree. I even left all the lights on downstairs, knowing that I wasn't planning on coming back down before bed, just so I didn't have to think about it being pitch black down there. I started going back upstairs, but on my way up the steps, I paused. I thought I'd heard what sort of sounded like my footsteps resonating through the house, but it didn't quite sound right, and I'd never heard the house echo sounds like that before. I took a few steps down and then back up, and it didn't make the same sound. I stood there unsure for a moment, replaying what I'd heard over and over in my head. I felt my eyes get wider and my heart begin racing before I bolted up the stairs and into my room, locking the door shut and calling the police. I was 99% sure that what I'd heard was someone else's footsteps in the house matching mine, almost like they were mimicking me walking so that I wouldn't hear them coming up behind me. When I was standing on the stairs thinking about it, I realized that was exactly what it sounded like. After the police were on the way, I called my friend, asking if he saw anything. He said no, but went to the front window while we were on call, trying to look around. It was a couple minutes later, he suddenly said, "Oh shit," and saw some guy leaving out of the window on the side of my house and running into the trees. He said it looked like the same guy he saw before. I couldn't even speak for a minute, terrified of how right I was about my paranoid feeling of not being alone. When police made it, I stood outside with them while they did their whole investigation. My friend also came out and talked to them. It didn't lead to much though, aside from the promise to search for the man and follow up if there's any leads. They did, however, compare it to a similar incident from a couple weeks ago in a nearby neighborhood, where a kid was also home alone and some guy was creeping around outside, eventually coming up to the window and trying to convince the kid to let him in. In both cases, though, it isn't really clear what he was plotting. Kidnapping is the obvious answer, but he didn't seem to have a car, So dragging a kid, kicking and screaming out of a house didn't seem likely to me. I don't know what was going to happen that night, and I never found out, because the guy is still out there, probably still creeping around and stalking someone without them knowing it. This happened not too long ago, when I was 26. Being older, Halloween hadn't been that big of a deal to me for probably a decade. It was sort of just another day to me. This year, I had most of the day off, but worked overnight from 10 to 6 a.m. I was a stalker for a local grocery store, so most nights were quiet, where I just work alone and at my own pace. By the time I left the house, the streets and sidewalks were already empty. No trick-or-treaters running around. However, when I parked and walked up to unlock the door and let myself in, I saw a couple of people around the side of the building in costumes. Didn't think much of it. Maybe some people just meeting up for whatever reason. I went in and relocked the doors, then started working. I was moving between the back warehouse and the aisles, stocking the shelves and doing all the usual. It really wasn't too long into my shift when I thought I heard someone say something outside the store. I went up to the front and saw that same group of people. They were close to the front windows, looking like maybe they were walking around. For reference, the store sat alone in a massive parking lot. There were some other buildings near it, but all unoccupied, so really the only reason to be in this parking lot was for the grocery store I worked at. But obviously, we weren't open. I stayed near the front and kept an eye on them. They passed by and were gone for 10 minutes, before coming back around. I wish I could have seen more of what they were actually doing, but the costumes they had on made it hard to tell if they were looking inside the store windows, or just standing near them. Either way, it was weird that they were hanging around here for so long, and for no reason. Couldn't see why they didn't walk around somewhere else. Eventually, I had to get back to working in other parts of the store, so I left the front. An hour or so went by. I'd been moving through the aisles, filling the shelves, and having one earbud in to listen to music while I worked. I was in one of the end aisles, far from the front, when I heard a knock at the door. It was 3 loud bangs against the glass. It startled me, but I quickly ran up to the front of the store to see who it was. I immediately saw the 4 guys in costumes, standing grouped up at the front, facing the window I was behind. I knew they saw me, and were clearly looking at me. I walked up closer and yelled through the glass, asking what they needed. As I stood there, I very quickly noticed none of them had bags or pillowcases for trick-or-treating. It would have been weird if they were still trick-or-treating at this time of night, let alone trying to at a closed grocery store. But at least it would have shown me that they might have been earlier, which would explain the costumes. Now it seemed like they were just wearing costumes to hide who they were. Not a single one of their faces was visible, and none of them responded. They just stood there, looking at me. I got really uncomfortable, but thought this could all be some Halloween prank, and honestly wasn't worth my time. I left and went back to the aisle I was in before. I still felt really weird about it, but held on to the idea that they were just doing something stupid to mess with me. Maybe they saw me walking inside earlier and thought it'd be funny. But it very quickly went much further than a simple joke. It wasn't 2 minutes later that there was an insanely loud thud against the glass at the front of the store. And before I could even make it to the end of the aisle to look, a second, even louder thud hit the glass, and was followed by what sounded like the door crashing open. I froze, hearing footsteps running in. I turned and sprinted to the back of the store. I was so scared I didn't even grab my bag that had my keys and wallet in it. I just sprinted straight out the back door, going to the road and continuing to run. When I had a chance to breathe, I called the police. By then, everyone was gone. We did have security footage though, showing exactly what happened, but it really didn't give any information that I didn't already know. The guys were hanging around outside the store for a couple of hours, and then smashed something against the door to break it open. They immediately ran in and were looking for me, which was the most horrifying part. They searched everywhere, one of them even having run to the back of the store and looked for me just 15 seconds after I got away. Had he seen me, the whole group might have chased me down the road, and things might have not ended so well for me. Ultimately, that was where things left off. What the group was actually wanting to do and all the other questions I have remain unknown.
Every cop sees something that they'll never forget, something that will stick with them for the rest of their life. What I am about to describe to you is that story for me. This is the most disturbing thing I have ever witnessed. When I turned 21, I joined the police force in a remote town that I won't name. The department needed new officers, and I was a young father who needed money, so the timing was perfect. Because I was a rookie, they assigned me to the night shift. It ran from 6 at night to 6 in the morning. The guys at the station sometimes teased me for my hours, saying that I always worked the crummiest shifts. I actually didn't mind them. I've always been a night owl. The guys even called me Nighthawk, and honestly, I kinda like that. Besides busting people for speeding and pulling over the occasional drunk driver, I spent most nights sitting back, listening to podcasts. In a weird way, it was kind of relaxing. After a year in the department, something happened one night that changed everything. A severe thunderstorm rolled into town and caused major power outages. Torrential downpour flooded most of the major roads. To be in the best position possible when accident reports came in, I parked my cruiser in a parking lot in the middle of town. At 2 in the morning, our dispatcher, Claire, radioed in. She reported that someone who sounded like an adult male claimed to have been kidnapped. They told her they were being held captive inside someone's home. Then, the call ended. When she redialed, the caller didn't answer. My cruiser had a built-in computer display that showed all the call details. Based on the address, I was about 10 minutes away, so I was probably the closest officer. I radioed in and told her I'd respond. I also requested backup. Another new officer named Chris chimed in and said he'd be on location at 5. Claire clicked on her radio, but hesitated for a few seconds over the static. Then she said that the callers sounded like they were altering their voice in some way, possibly through digital means, to make themselves sound like a child. She used the specific phrase, like a young girl. She concluded that officers should proceed with extreme caution. All of us were pretty close to the station, so we felt nervous for one another during high-risk cases like this. I radioed back and said 10-4, then drove to the scene. When I turned into the neighborhood, I saw that every single street lamp was out. The entire block had lost power. That meant we would have low visibility going into the home we were investigating, which put us in greater danger. I followed my GPS to the end of the street, where the house was, and saw that Chris had already beaten me. His cruiser was idling in front of the house. I pulled up next to them and rolled down my window. Chris commented on the home's poor condition. I glanced ahead, taking it in for myself. The grass was knee-high. Overgrown bushes blocked out the windows. The roof was dented in several areas and had a ton of missing shingles. It looked completely abandoned. This set off alarm bells in my head. You can gather a lot about someone's mental state by how they treat their living space. I told Chris I'd take the lead. We both stepped out of our cruisers into the pouring rain, opened our umbrellas, and followed the waterlogged path up to the door. Chris clicked on his flashlight. Whenever a second officer like Chris is present during an investigation, their entire job is to protect the leading officer by monitoring the suspect's body language. If the suspect makes a move on the cop that's interrogating them, they neutralize the threat. Chris made the perfect backup because he was both observant and calm under pressure. This allowed me to focus solely on the suspect's story and if I was hearing the truth. When we reached the door, I rang the bell. Then we stood there, listening for movement inside. Rain pounded against our backs. After a few seconds, footsteps shuffled to the door. Then they paused. Whoever was on the other side of the door stood completely still, just waiting. A strange feeling came over me that we were being watched. Slowly, my gaze drifted over to the peephole. As soon as I made eye contact, a distorted shape moved back, like whoever was watching us had pulled their head away. "If you're in there," I said, "we'd like to ask you a few questions. Open up, please." They froze again, as if they were thinking about what to do next. Then the lock started turning. The door creaked open, but only by a foot. From the darkness, a man peeked out of the crack. He looked like he was in his early 30s. He was overweight, balding, and wore thick-brimmed glasses. I took a single look into his eyes and sensed that he was hiding something. I informed him that we'd received a call from his address of someone claiming to be kidnapped. The man acted confused. He apologized and told us it must have been a pocket dial. I asked him if it was a pocket dial, then how could he explain the voice in the phone call? For a split second, the man averted his gaze, then said that he didn't know anything about a voice. I asked him if there was anyone else in the house, and he said he lived alone. Then I told him that, for safety reasons, we needed to have a look inside. "Not without a warrant," he said. These days, a warrant can be obtained within minutes. I went back to my cruiser, called dispatch, and requested communication with the on-call magistrate. 5 minutes later, Claire came back on the radio and told me a judge approved a telephonic warrant and emailed it. We were clear to enter. I showed the warrant to the man. He reluctantly pulled the door open, and I could see that his hands were visibly shaking. I clicked on my own flashlight and stepped inside. A putrid smell immediately hit me. I scanned around to find the source and saw a hallway straight ahead and a room directly to my right. I shined my light into the room and saw what looked like a living room. It was absolutely disgusting. Piles of clothes and stacks of dirty dishes were spread across the carpet. Cockroaches crawled all over them. A couch that looked like it was pulled from the side of the road sat at an angle against the wall. This man obviously used this room as his living space. I'd seen these sorts of living conditions in drug cases before. When I turned to look back at the man, he shifted uncomfortably. I made a mental note to check for paraphernalia once I'd confirmed the house was safe. Then I stepped toward the hallway. My foot struck something. I looked down. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw a pink Barbie doll house that I knew I'd seen before. I thought about it, and I'd realized I'd bought this exact set for my daughter last year for Christmas. I asked the man if he had kids. He said no, but explained to us that sometimes his nieces came over, so he kept a few toys around for them. Chris and I exchanged a look. No mother in their right mind would allow children into this environment. I told him that this was his last chance to tell me if anyone else was in the house. He assured me there wasn't. I started down the hallway and the man followed, saying that nothing was down there. Chris yanked him back by his arm and ordered him to stay put. The hallway had an open room on either side and a closed door at the end, which was probably the basement. I peeked inside the first bedroom, scanning from left to right. I saw more children's toys and even items like diapers scattered across the floor. In the corner, the dark shape of a person was hunched over. I drew my weapon, only to realize that it was a doll, sagging its head down in a rocking chair. The shock of that visual made my heart pound. I leaned against the door frame and steadied my breathing. Chris asked me what I had seen. Before I could respond, I started studying the doll. It was the largest one I had ever seen, every bit as big as a person, and the man had dressed it in women's clothing. On the bed beside it, ladies' blouses, jeans, and lingerie were folded into neat piles. Each pile was separated by color. Meanwhile, the rest of the house was a pigsty. What was happening in this room felt so wrong on many different levels. All clear, I told Chris. I moved further down the hall and glanced into the second bedroom. This one was empty. I reached the final door at the end of the hall when, from behind me, the man called and asked if I'd like to see the upstairs instead. I told him yes, but first, I was going to see the basement. The man said again that there was nothing down there. I heard Chris tell the man to stay still, which meant he was probably trying to follow me down the hall. The closer I moved into this part of the house, the more agitated he became. I reached for the handle, twisted the knob, and pushed the door open. It squealed on its hinges. A set of wooden steps descended into a pitch-black room. I shined my light down. I could only see the area that surrounded the landing. It looked equally as messy as the upstairs. From deep inside the room, in an area I couldn't see, something rattled. I told Chris that I had heard movement. The man responded instead, apologizing to me and Chris over and over again. Even though this was the last thing I wanted to do, I had no choice. The man was lying to us. Someone was down there. I headed down the staircase. Each step creaked under my weight. The rattling noise from inside the room grew louder. Behind me, the man repeatedly begged us to stop looking around. I neared the landing and swept my flashlight across stacks of boxes. No one appeared in my line of sight. Across the room, there was another door. The noise was coming from there. I drew my weapon. I commanded whoever was inside to come out slowly with their hands up. Whoever was inside stopped moving. I shouted the same command a second time. The door remained shut. I crossed the room, sliding between boxes and old furniture that blocked the way. My sights were trained on the door. When I stood within several feet, I paused, listening. Whoever was inside remained perfectly still. My anxiety ticked up with each second. So many things could go wrong in this situation. I moved to the side of the door frame in case they were armed and tried to fire through the door. I reached for the knob, grabbed on, and twisted. Then I swung the door open. I was still hidden to the side of the frame. If anything besides empty hands emerged, I would have to use deadly force. After several agonizing moments, nothing came. I said a quick prayer, then aimed my weapon right into the room. What I saw, I can't go into detail on, but basically, this is what happened. A man in his mid-40s was being held captive in that basement. He was a father of 3 and a respected member of the community. Months after he went missing, everyone, including his family, assumed he was dead. After 2 years in captivity, he finally got the chance to escape. Earlier in the night, before we arrived, the homeowner brought the victim's dinner down and made the mistake of leaving his phone behind. The victim managed to activate Siri and call 911. When we arrived on scene, The victim had already been confined in a way that prevented him from calling upstairs or making any kind of substantial noise. Then, when I ordered him to come out, he froze in fear, not because he couldn't obey my command, but because he didn't want me to use lethal force, thinking that he was a threat. Once I opened the door and found him, we arrested the homeowner on the spot and took the victim to the hospital for immediate treatment. I feel incredibly lucky that no one was harmed and that we could reunite this man with his family. But the most disturbing detail, which has haunted me every day since, is how my dispatcher described the voice of the man who made the call. Why was he speaking like a child? The only explanation that makes sense is that this man was forced to speak in that young tone of voice for so long that even when he called the station, that's the only way he could communicate. And if he was forced to do that, what else inside that house was he forced to do? I live on a large property in California. We have lots of animals, and honestly, it's a beautiful place. But at night, it's a different story. There are also some renters in a house out back, which used to be a barn. We've all experienced something creepy or paranormal here, but this night still haunts me. A lot of times, I stayed on the property with the renter's son, Aiden. My dad and brothers would go out of town throughout the week to work. Aiden's mom would leave every other week to go work out of town as well, meaning Aiden and myself would stay and take care of the animals or do chores if we weren't in school. It was around September of last year when this occurred. School got off at 3:30, but Aiden and I would take the bus home, so we'd get to the house at around 4 to 4:10. On this day, we got home starving, so we went inside to make some food, then outside to do our chores. By that time, it must have been around 6:30. After working for a bit, Aiden went inside to go play video games, while I stayed to clean the horses. Time flew by, and I remember looking at my phone when I was done and reading 9:46 p.m. I hurried to feed the animals and clean out their waters. I was in the middle of cleaning one of the waters when I got the chills. I felt someone watching me. Creeped out, I looked up to check my surroundings, but like always, I didn't see anything. I took a seat on some bales of hay while I let the water fill up. I was playing on my phone and spaced out for a few minutes, but snapped back to reality when I heard the water spilling. Just as I looked up to see it, I felt a sharp chill go up my back. In the distance, I saw a dark figure crouched behind a tree on our fence line, looking straight in my direction. When I saw it, the first thing that came to my mind was that it was Aiden for sure. I called him and said, "Dude, quit trying to scare me and come help me feed." Right away, he replied, "What do you mean? I'm inside." Then, I noticed when I called Aiden, the figure didn't even move. Not an inch. This confirmed I did not know who it was. Aiden heard my voice shake a bit and realized what was going on. He said again, "Bro, I'm inside. That's not me." Keep in mind, the whole time I was on the phone with Aiden, I was watching this dark figure, but I hung up and looked right at it with my full attention. After a moment, it got up and started jogging away. My heart dropped with fear and anxiety. I started running toward it and yelling at it to slow down and to reveal themselves. I chased it all the way to the back of Aiden's house. That's when Aiden came out and started looking for it too. I saw a glimpse of it jumping over some boxes and tall grass. What happened next completely freaked me out. It jumped over our 6-foot fence like nothing. As it flew through the air, I got a better look at it. It was around 6'5" and lengthy. I chased after it over the fence, then ran it down the gravel road. Around this time, something strange started happening to me. Everything was becoming darker. I was losing my vision. By the time I got to the edge of our property, my vision went almost completely black. Meanwhile, I'm still yelling at this figure and jogging towards it. I went down the little hill and saw him looking directly at me. His eyes were wide open like golf balls and white as snow. That was the last thing I saw before I collapsed on the ground, hyperventilating and freaking the hell out. I couldn't wrap my head around what was happening. At some point, Aiden came down the hill to get me. I could still barely see, but he told me the figure was long gone. After he helped me get to my feet, we made our way back to the barn with the horses to finish feeding them. I was still shaken up and needed to do something normal like chores to calm down. I slowly got my vision back as well, but I still didn't feel quite right. After everything was done, I went inside to get ready for bed, hoping that was the end of it. But then, around 2:30 in the morning, I woke up, seemingly to nothing at all. I must have been awake for around 15 seconds before I heard my downstairs window open. That night, I slept with my door open for some reason. That's why I heard it so clear. I was still half asleep, so I wasn't sure if my mind was playing tricks on me. Not until I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. I felt my heart drop. I bolted out of bed and got my dad's 9mm from my drawer. He always left it with me just in case something like this ever happened. Below, the steps were getting closer and heavier. Then, they stopped right at my door. I was standing at the foot of my bed with the gun pointed towards the door frame. My heart was beating so fast, I felt like it was going to come out of my chest. I then heard them walk right inside my room. They stepped towards me and stopped around a foot away. But there wasn't anything, or anyone. All I was hearing was footsteps. I thought I was going to go blind with madness again. But then I heard them slowly back away. I kept the gun pointed in their direction until they left the room. Then suddenly, everything went quiet. No wind blowing, no crickets, frogs, nothingness. After 5 minutes, I laid back down. I didn't end up going to sleep after everything. I just stayed up praying for the rest of the night. I've never had anything like this happen to me before or since, and I still have no way to explain it. I just hope it never happens again.
It happened in my bedroom at the age of 10. I always had trouble sleeping and spent most nights tossing and turning. I was a horror film fanatic as a child, and being scared was something I didn't have much experience with. I was not afraid of the dark, nor was I easily swayed by strange sounds or odd encounters. I did, however, know when to haul ass out of a situation or to find a trusted adult. I always slept with my closet doors open, which will come to be of some significance later in the story. I should also mention that my family home was in a heavily wooded area, in what some may refer to as the middle of nowhere. One night, around 1 a.m., I awoke to a sound coming from underneath my bed. It sounded like one of my cats was scratching themselves with one of their feet or doing something to cause a thumping beneath me. I had heard this same sounds many times before, and its source had always been one of my fuzzy friends. So this time, I didn't look. Closed my eyes and tried to resume my slumber. I turned over onto my left side, which left me facing the wall against which my bed was pressed up. I heard the sound again, and thinking that my kitty was directly beneath me, I said, "Good night." I was able to fall asleep once again. The next time I awoke, it was to a surreal and shocking scene. The sheet and comforter of my bed were no longer covering me. I saw a man standing over my bed, poking me. Literally poking me with his finger. and the way in which he did so was truly horrifying. It was not the way that a child would poke a friend in jest. It was as if he was touching another human being for the first time, exploring the sensation of the tip of his index finger jabbing at flesh. What I saw was so unbelievable and so impossibly strange that I believed I was dreaming. I tried desperately to awake from my nightmare, to no avail. The poking continued. He poked at my chest, my belly, my legs, and my arms. Paralyzed and scared shitless, I yelled, "Wake up!" And with this, the man threw himself to the floor and closed his eyes, as if he was trying to lead me to believe that he was asleep or dead. I have no idea. It was at this time I realized I could not have been dreaming. I somehow found the ability to move, and I jumped from the top of my bed over the man lying on the floor next to me and ran towards my parents' room. When I got to their bedroom door, something came over me. I told myself that this was all impossible, that there was no way that a person could have entered our home without breaking in, as we had always kept every door and window locked at night. I had seen many strange things in my home, while either falling asleep or waking up. By the third or fourth time after speaking to my mom or dad about it, I knew that it was my mind playing tricks on me. Plush toys do not have the ability to turn and whisper into each other's ears. Do not ask why, dear listener, as I have no explanation to offer you, but I turned away from my parents' bedroom door and decided to hastily check the house for a break-in. What I found was that nothing was out of the ordinary. No broken windows or locks. No busted doors. I assured myself that I had to have been dreaming or hallucinating and blamed my obsession with horror for this. I made my way down the long, dark, and narrow hallway to my bedroom. I peeked inside and saw no one. I turned on the light, got down on the floor just outside the doorway, and looked under the bed. Still nothing. I proceeded to check both of my windows for signs of a break-in, which were not present. Both windows were closed and locked. I knew it. I was totally seeing things. I crawled back into bed and decided to watch some TV in order to calm myself down and distract myself from thoughts of the scary as hell dream / hallucination I'd just had. I turned on the TV, flipped to a channel with a seemingly boring program. This always helped me become sleepy, and put the remote control on my bedside table. I was lying on my right side, facing away from the wall that I mentioned previously. As I lay there, my eyes began to adjust to the dark room with the faint light from the TV screen. Just beyond the TV, I saw something that made my heart sink into the pit of my stomach. Inside my closet, with one of the doors now slightly closed, I saw the man standing perfectly still, facing the wall, hiding, waiting for me to fall asleep, I imagine. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I sat and stared at the man in the closet for what seemed like minutes, but was likely only a few seconds. I quietly got out of bed, hoping that the man wouldn't notice and that my dad could catch him hiding in the closet. I once again made my way to my parents' bedroom door, still remaining as quiet as I possibly could, and went inside. I shook my dad and my mom at the same time, and when they awoke, I said, "Shh, don't make any sound. There's somebody in my closet." My parents both jumped up and said, "What?" I repeated myself and asked them to please call 911. My mom immediately picked up the phone. Neither of my parents doubted my claim, as I had always been honest and forthright. They both knew that there was no way I was making this up or that I was mistaken. I'm sure that the look I must have had on my face made it clear that this was really happening. My dad told my mom and I that he was going to look and urged us to stay in their bedroom and lock the door, so we did. At this point, I was beyond scared. I didn't know what the man was capable of, whether he had a weapon or whether my dad was safe. I just stood in the room with my mom and cried. After what felt like hours, my dad knocked on the door and told me it was him and that it was okay to open the door. My mom unlocked the door and let my dad inside. I said something to the effect of, "Did you get him?" And my dad looked at me with the most unsettling and confused look imaginable. He said, "There's no one there." I assured him that there was indeed a man in my room and that he had been poking me. My dad said that he just checked every inch of the house and found nobody. He had also checked the doors and windows, just as I had done. Then it hit me. He must have had a key. As soon as I said this, my parents looked at each other in absolute terror. Our nearest neighbor, a trusted and beloved friend whom we considered family, was in possession of a key to our house, as she had regularly babysat me since I was a toddler. She was the only person outside of my immediate family with a key to our home. Soon after this revelation, the police arrived, took statements, checked around our property, and left. None of us got any sleep that night. The next day, my dad went to my neighbor's house and asked if she knew where her key to our house was. She said yes, and when she went to show him, she saw that it was missing. Her home had no signs of a break-in, and she had always kept her doors and windows locked. My parents had all of the locks on our doors changed and opted to never give a key to anyone, except in the wake of an emergency. I never discovered the identity of the man that lurked in my bedroom that night. The event left me traumatized, and it took a very long time for me to accept what had happened and move on. My sleeping trouble turned into full-on insomnia, and for about a decade, I was unable to sleep without a light on. So these incidents started about 6 years ago and went on for a couple of years. I used to be really into the music scene, going to shows and festivals every chance I got. This often meant meeting random people whose names I would forget 5 seconds later. As a result of being out in Atlanta nightlife so often, I got frequent friend requests on Facebook, and naive younger me blindly accepted them, assuming they were just people I'd met at shows that I was too drunk or distracted to remember. One day, I got a message from somebody named Eddie. His Facebook profile picture was of someone at least a decade older than me, with long straggly hair. He looked harmless enough, just another show-going hippie, I assumed. His message simply asked if I was the girl that danced a half circle around him at the local show last night, and then twirled dreamily away, or something along those lines. This was back in 2012, so I don't remember the exact words. I responded that I had no recollection of that, and upon further investigation, saw that he lived in an entirely different state, so it couldn't have been me. He said that I must have a doppelganger out there somewhere, and I left the conversation at that. Over the next few months, I'd get random notifications that he had messaged me, asking if I'd be at various shows across the southeast. I mostly ignored the messages, but would very occasionally respond, shortly expressing interest in a band he had mentioned, just trying to be polite. Why younger me felt the need to be polite to everyone is beyond me. I have since learned that it's okay to not respond to persistent internet strangers. The messages became more and more frequent, so I just started to leave them unread. Again, why I didn't block him is beyond me. I guess I thought he was just harmless and lonely. Fast forward about a year. It's the summer of 2013, if 2 of my best friends and I were caravanning to Wakarusa, a music festival that took place in Ozark, Arkansas. It was about a 13-hour drive from Atlanta, but totally worth it. We went every year. An important note here is that this wasn't some small, intimate festival. It hosted upwards of 40,000 people, and it was often hard to keep track of my friends, let alone find people I knew who came separately. So my friends and I are on a blanket in the middle of a huge crowd, watching widespread panic. It's nighttime, so the only lights are coming from the stage / random LED toys or glow sticks or whatever. Out of nowhere, someone beelines for our blanket, makes himself at home next to me without permission, and strikes up a conversation. My group of friends is generally warm and accepting, and it wasn't unusual to make random friends at a big hippie fest like this, so thought nothing of it at first. Probably just someone high on ecstasy and looking for company. It wasn't until he started referencing me in my Facebook personally that the alarm bells started going off. This was Eddie. I had honestly completely forgotten about him and his persistent messages, and in the darkness, there was no way I would have recognized him. He was talking like I was an old friend and tried to follow us around all night. Once I subtly alerted the others about who he was, we made every excuse in the book to try and leave, go back to our campsite and call it a night. He was painfully insistent on following us back there and continuing to hang out. Obviously, I didn't want him to know where I slept, so I tried to appease him by saying I was exhausted, but that we could try to meet up tomorrow. Again, dumb, I know. I was just doing anything I could to get him away in the moment and had no intention of actually following through. He finally left us alone, and we walked a long roundabout way to our campsite, just in case he had watched her or tried to follow at a distance. The next day, I made an avid point to avoid the area where we ran into Eddie / discussed meeting up. The festival venue was huge, so I figured there was no way he'd find me again. I was beside a small stage in the back corner of the venue, hooping in the woods with my friends, when I noticed him out of the corner of my eye. He was standing beside a tree alone, watching me with a weird smile. It reminded me of a proud dad watching his young daughter play, but with way creepier and more sinister overtones. Still, he hadn't done or said anything explicitly creepy or threatening, but his presence was so unsettling that I grabbed my friends and we pretended that we had forgotten about a set that was starting, so we ran out of the wooded stage area. I remember hoping he didn't notice I had seen him. The festival ended the next day, and I was relieved to not see him again. Fast forward about another year. At this point, I barely used Facebook and had all but forgotten about Eddie. My friend that I went to the festival with was visiting from out of town that night, and we were going to get some drinks. He got to my house, and we were catching up, and the subject of the festival came up. We started talking about Eddie and how weird that whole situation was, but at this point, it was less creepy and more of just a strange memory. I told him Eddie used to message me all the time, but I had stopped opening them years ago. Naturally, my friend wanted to look through the messages, so I obliged. I began to scroll through the messages, and I realized just how dire of a mistake it may have been not to block him. He had started by asking me what shows I was going to go to, what part of Atlanta I lived in, etc. Not taking the hint that I clearly had no interest in responding at that point. Then, as the months went by, he was sending me links to tickets he had bought for me to shows in Atlanta, and then links to tickets he had bought for us to go together. There was one message asking where he could pick me up for a show that was 2 hours away in Athens, and saying that he couldn't wait to see me again. The messages continued to go on, but at this point, I was so creeped out, I immediately blocked him, finally, and closed the computer wide-eyed. What the actual heck? He sounded like he was carrying on an entire relationship with me without my consent. He never acknowledged the fact that I literally hadn't responded to or even seen a message from him in over a year. Shaken up, we decided to just go get a drink and stop thinking about this weirdo. We get to Edgewood, a popular bar district in my city, and walk to our favorite small bar to get a drink. As soon as we walk into the bar, my heart sinks to the pit of my stomach. To this day, this was the creepiest / most coincidental moment that has ever happened. I see Eddie sitting at the far end of the bar. His face lights up as soon as I walk in, and he motions me over. He says something along the lines of, "I can't believe it's you," and starts firing off questions about me, my life, what I've been up to, and all that. At this point, the darkest feeling washes over me. I just feel unsafe and exposed. Like, why is he here? He doesn't even live in Georgia. I quickly tell him I have to use the bathroom, but then I'll be back to the bar for a drink. I grab my friend, equally in shock, and we speed walk around the corner to the bathrooms and then past them. I'll forever be grateful that the door to the patio area was just past the bathroom, so got a head start. We get outside, hop the fence, and start running to my car. I glance behind us, and Eddie somehow figured out in those 15 seconds that we left, even though you can't see the bathrooms from where he was sitting, and he is walking rapidly across the sidewalk in our direction, eyes on me. We book it to my car and get the heck out of there, and leave Edgewood as quickly as we can. Shaken, I drive us around for about an hour before eventually going home to make sure we weren't being followed. As inconclusive as the whole thing was, that was the last time I ever saw Eddie, and I often wonder if this was just a strange string of coincidences or it was more sinister. After all, he didn't even live in Georgia. Why was he at one of my favorite bars alone, the night I happened to go through all of his old messages? Had he somehow gotten a hold of my location via Facebook? I made sure all my location services were off when I checked my phone, so to this day, I have no idea how he ended up there or what his intentions were. I've always wanted to share this, but I could never find the right place. For reference, at the time this all began, I was 14 and a freshman in high school, back in 2008/2009, so not recent at all. It all began during the first couple of weeks of school. I went to this school district all my life and never had any real issues since I had no enemies and only friends. So anyway, it all began one Friday afternoon after school. I was hanging out with friends outside of the school until my mom came to pick me up, when I decided to go upstairs to my locker and put a textbook away that I was originally going to bring home for the weekend. When I got up to my locker, there was a note taped onto it. My name was written on it with a heart around it, and I read it. It was a love letter signed, "Your secret admirer." Thinking it was a friend playing a prank, I laughed it off and tossed it in the trash. When I confronted them downstairs, they denied that they put a note on my locker and insisted that it was probably from a boy. I didn't know what to think, but I did think of a few cute guys I went to school with and hoped it was from one of them. But I sighed and thought it could have been anyone, and most likely none of them. 2 months go by. During this time, we had school picture day, and my mom had ordered some, which were eventually given to us during one of our classes. I kept them in my locker so I wouldn't lose them. It was a Friday, and I was going to stay after school with friends again and hang around until the school football game was over later in the evening. I waited until about 2 hours after school ended or so to grab my belongings out of my locker, including the photos. I put them in my backpack and headed on outside and hung out around the football field with my friends until people started showing up for the game, after which we walked around or sat in the grass and talked the rest of the evening. When I got home that night, I gave my mom the photos, and she noticed that one of the wallet-sized photos had been cut off from the rest. I never bothered to look at all of them, and so I wasn't aware of this. I told her I didn't cut one off, but she didn't believe me. I didn't know what to think of it. few weeks go by, and I all but forgot about the missing photo. I found another note taped to my locker, and this time, one of my school photos was in it, with a heart drawn around my head. A wallet-sized photo. The note made mention of how beautiful I looked during the game, sitting with my friends in the grass, talking and laughing. This made me feel weird. Whoever's doing this had stolen one of my photos either out of my locker during school, which means they have my lock combination, on that Friday or while I left my backpack unattended during the football game. Once again, it was probably one of my friends playing a prank on me, and I didn't say anything about it. It had been several months since that last note. Things took a rather stressful turn the following week. I was at home after school one day, alone, while my mom was working a double shift when somebody came knocking on my front door. Thinking it was a pesky neighbor, I took my sweet time to answer it and opened the door to find nobody there. I looked around and saw nothing but other mobile homes and neighbors' cars. I shut the door and resumed what I was doing. I heard the knocking again about 10 minutes later. I took my time to answer it and found Mike, one of our only friendly male neighbors, there with his Boston Terrier on a leash. He asked me if I had somebody over, which I didn't. He then told me that he saw somebody snooping around my home a few minutes ago. I felt uncomfortable and said that I didn't have anyone over and asked who it was, and he said he didn't recognize him. I thanked him and locked all of my doors and windows after he left. The next month was full of incidents where our motion sensor backlight would come on in the evening and was capped off by my mom calling the police after she found a dead rabbit nailed to our back porch in a rather cruel fashion. At the time, I never would have imagined that the notes, the snooping around, and now the dead rabbit were the work of somebody who had been stalking me in the shadows for the last several months, but it all came to fruition the following day at school. I found the final note taped to my locker. There was a big bulge in it, and when I took it apart, the foot of a rabbit fell onto the floor in front of me. I shrieked in terror as a teacher came running up to me, and I pointed out the rabbit's foot. He picked it up and asked me where it came from. I showed him the note, and we immediately went to the office and showed the vice principal what we found. Later in the day, I was called into the office and found my mom there with the principal and vice principal. It was there that I had to recount the events over the last couple of months for the first time to anyone and give the names of students that I think may have been responsible based on any suspicious interactions I had through social media or in school, but I never had anyone that seemed off to me. They told me that if anything were to happen again, to let them know and they'll get the police involved if my life appears to be in danger. Mom had already contacted the state trooper who visited our home the previous night about the rabbit's foot being found in my locker at school and how a student may have been involved in it. From that day onward, nothing else major happened. However, about halfway through my junior year, I got another love letter. This time, instead of it being written out by hand, it was typed out and signed, "Your secret admirer from freshman year." I had all but forgotten about what had happened during my freshman year. I kept this note and gave it to the principal, who kept it as evidence in case things escalated again, but they never did. Luckily, nothing else ever happened afterwards. At least nothing that was obvious.
I'd been on dating apps for 3 months when I matched with Evan that December. My ex had moved out in September, and I was tired of sitting alone in our apartment every night. Evan's profile said that he was a software engineer, and he had a husky named Rhodey. He said he liked hiking and made pasta from scratch occasionally. He was a brown-haired guy with a charming smile. We messaged for 2 weeks before he asked if I wanted help decorating for Christmas. He'd noticed I mentioned feeling unmotivated about the holidays and offered to bring lights and ornaments if I wanted company. It seemed sweet. Therefore, I said yes. We set it up for Saturday evening. He'd bring the decorations and had ordered pizza. I gave him my address and asked him to come by around 7. That day, I actually cleaned up, put on real jeans instead of the scrubs I'd been wearing around the house, and felt almost normal. The doorbell rang at 7:15. I opened the door and found this guy who was on my porch, who was not Evan. I mean, he had the same general build, maybe, but he was older and thinner. His face looked wrong, with skin pulled tight over his cheekbones, and his eyes were too wide. He held up a Dollar Tree bag and grinned. I scowled and started closing the door as I told him there must have been a mistake. He laughed and said he'd been traveling for work and lost a bunch of weight from stress. Said I probably remembered him from his old photos, the ones from like 2 years ago, when he still had his dad bod, and apologized. The explanation made sense. People do that on apps all the time, right? And he seemed really embarrassed about it. So I stepped back and let him in. He walked through my apartment real slow, looking at everything. He paused at the photos on my wall and peeped at the hallway leading to my bedroom as he rambled about traffic and the weather. He said he knew the area pretty well and he'd been in the neighborhood before. None of it sounded like the Evan I'd been messaging. That guy was charming, witty, and quick with comebacks. This person was jittery and couldn't stop touching things. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. He said the walls in these buildings were so thick, you really can't hear much between apartments. I tried to act normal when inside, but I was freaking out. A couple of minutes passed before I told him I needed to grab the step stool from my bedroom. He said he'd help and started to follow me down the hall, even when I told him I was fine. We reached the bedroom door. I got in and firmly told him to wait outside. Immediately, I locked the door. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My hands were shaking so bad the phone almost slipped. I was trying to whisper to the operator when he knocked. I didn't answer. He paused before he called my name in this sing-song way that made every hair on my body stand up. In the next 3 seconds, he was trying my doorknob. He pounded on the door so hard the frame rattled. I realized my door would eventually give in and the cops wouldn't make it in time. So I jumped from my window, landing barefoot on the cold ground. I could still hear him screaming and kicking my door. I ran to my neighbor, Mrs. Smith's door. I pounded on the door until she opened it up. She took one look at me and pulled me inside without saying a word. The police showed up maybe 10 minutes later. They went into my apartment with their guns drawn. The man was gone, but he'd left things behind. Every cabinet in my kitchen was open. Every drawer was pulled out and dumped. The bathroom medicine cabinet was hanging open. My underwear drawer in the bedroom was raided. It gave me the creeps when I realized this man had stolen a few pairs of my underwear. And on my living room wall, written in something dark and dripping, was a message that read, "Merry Christmas, Leah." The officers wouldn't tell me what it was written in. They just said they were sending it to the lab. One of them asked if the man had been bleeding when I let him in. I told them I didn't think so. They asked if I knew his real name or anything about him that could help identify him. I showed them the dating profile on my phone, but it was already deleted before he showed up. The phone number he'd messaged me from went to a disconnected line. The reports claimed the substance on my wall was human blood. They couldn't tell whose. The DNA didn't match with anything in their system. They again asked if I'd noticed cuts anywhere on the man. I didn't, which meant the blood came from somewhere else. The detectives said they were looking into it, but didn't have much to go on. They never found him. The case went cold after a month. I moved out 2 weeks later. I couldn't stay there because I knew he had been in my bedroom and gone through my things, that he'd planned the whole thing. It's been a year. I still can't look at Christmas lights without my stomach turning. Can't open dating apps or be alone with anyone I don't know. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't locked that bedroom door and gotten out. The detective said I was lucky. Most women in these situations don't get the chance to run. But I don't feel lucky. I feel trapped, knowing he's out there, somewhere, using someone else's photos, offering to help another lonely woman hang Christmas lights, getting invited into another apartment, and I wonder if she'll have an escape route. I was 9 years old that Christmas Eve. It had been a year since my parents split. It was a nasty divorce. Dad moved to Arizona with his new girlfriend right away, making promises he never kept. He did send child support checks, though, that Mom cashed and spent on other things. We lived in a second-floor apartment on the east side, the kind where the elevator never worked and the hallways smelled like cigarettes and mildew. Mom worked at a gas station when she bothered to show up. Her boyfriend, Ray, didn't work at all. The heat had been shut off for almost a week. I slept in my winter coat most nights. That night, I woke up around 8. The apartment was dark except for the TV glow from some old movie playing with the sound turned down. Mom was passed out on the living room floor near the coffee table. Ray was in the recliner by the window with the needle still in his arm. I'd stopped trying to wake them up months ago. My stomach hurt. I hadn't eaten since lunch at school the day before. Christmas break meant no free meals, just whatever I could find at home. I checked the kitchen cabinets and found baking soda, old tea bags, and a can of beans we couldn't open because the can opener got pawned last month, along with a microwave. The fridge light hasn't come on since the power was cut 2 days ago. Inside was sour milk and a half-empty jar of pickles. I stood there in the dark, watching my breath come out in clouds, when I heard the knock. This was strange because we didn't have visitors who knocked. All of my mom's friends just walked in. I walked to the door slowly and asked who was there without opening it. A man's voice answered, saying he was Santa Claus and had a special gift just for me. Even at 9, I wasn't that stupid. I told him to go away, but he kept insisting on coming in, which freaked me out a bit. When he still didn't budge, I told him about my mom dialing the cops. There was silence for a long time after that. Then he chuckled and asked if I meant the woman passed out on the floor. My stomach dropped. I turned around slowly and noticed our living room window. It faced the parking lot, and we always kept the curtains open. There was a man with his face pressed against the glass. He was wearing a ripped Santa suit with no fake beard or hat. He had a pale face and a smile that looked unsettling. He had a crowbar in his hand, and he was staring directly at my mom. I screamed and ran to her and shook her shoulder hard. She groaned but didn't open her eyes. Glass shattered somewhere behind me. I watched, horrified, as he climbed through the window, humming the Christmas jingle. He slowly crawled towards my mom, dragging the crowbar behind him. It made a sickening noise. I hurriedly backed away and ran to the bathroom door, locking myself in. Within 15 seconds, the furniture was crashing. Ray was shouting at the guy to back away. He'd promised he'd pay them back. The guy laughed. Suddenly, Mom was screaming too. I could hear the metal clash. Mom's shrill voice suddenly cut through everything. She was screaming my name over and over. Her screams turned into choked gurgles until they stopped. I pressed my hands harder against my ears and squeezed my eyes shut. I was waiting for him to break down the door and come for me, but he didn't. Soon, loud sirens filled the air, followed by heavy boots that pounded up the stairs. The cops found me in the bathroom. I couldn't move or speak. The officer knelt and asked if I was hurt. He told me not to look when he carried me out, but I looked anyway. Blood was everywhere. They had covered Mom and Ray's lifeless bodies lying on the floor with white sheets. On the kitchen counter was a dirty gray sock stuffed with candy. The police took me to the station and asked questions. I told them everything I could remember. They called my dad. I heard the officer on the phone explaining what happened and heard him say Mom was dead. Dad showed up 3 days later. He didn't hug me when we met. He just asked if I was okay, and I nodded, even though I wasn't. The drive to the airport was quiet. He asked a few questions about what I needed from the apartment. I told him I didn't want anything from there, and he said that was probably smart. On the plane, He finally admitted Mom was problematic even before I was born. He said he'd tried to help, but he couldn't. He said none of this was my fault. I didn't know what to say to that. His wife was waiting at the airport in Phoenix. She smiled at me and said she was sorry about what happened. They had a guest room set up for me already. Her 2 kids from her first marriage kept staring at me like they didn't know what to make of me. Nobody talked about it after that first week. The case went cold within months. It was just another tragedy in the file cabinets. I'm 31 now. Dad died 2 years later from a heart attack. His wife and I barely spoke at the funeral. I've got my apartment and my life. I don't celebrate Christmas, and I haven't since I was 9. Sometimes I look up the case online. There's not much there except for a couple newspaper articles with the headlines like "Double Suicide on Christmas Eve" and "Child Survives Attack." They don't mention the sock full of candy or the sick Christmas jingle. They never found him. I don't know if he's dead or in prison somewhere, or if he ever did it again. All I know is what I remember, and I remember everything. Lila and I had rented this cabin we found online for Christmas Eve. It was one of those rustic mountain places advertised as secluded romantic getaway. The drive up took 3 hours. Snow was falling heavily by the time we arrived. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by dense pine forest. There weren't any other houses or lights visible. We unloaded the car, got the fireplace going, and opened a bottle of wine. By 7, we were settled in and finally started to relax when someone knocked on the front door. Lila and I looked at each other. We weren't expecting anyone. The rental company had left a key in the lockbox, and we hadn't seen another car on the road for the last hour. Anyway, I opened the door to find a woman standing on the porch, bundled in a heavy winter coat and a wool hat. Her face was pale, and her eyes were too wide. She introduced herself as a friend of the property owner. She said she lived nearby and wanted to make sure we had everything we needed. I thanked her, said we were all set, and started to close the door. But she stepped closer and asked if she could come in for a minute. Something about the way she was looking past me into the cabin made my skin crawl. Right then, Lila appeared behind me. She politely told the woman we were fine, that we appreciated her checking but didn't need anything. The woman's smile faltered. She stared at Lila for a long moment, then back at me, before she nodded and left. We closed the door and locked it. Lila said that was weird. I agreed. We tried to shake it off and went back to our wine and the fire. But I couldn't forget about the way that woman had looked at us. The way she tried to see inside the cabin. She hadn't mentioned which direction she'd come from or exactly where she lived. But Lila got over it, so I didn't bring it up. We went to bed around 11. The bedroom was on the 2nd floor with windows overlooking the forest. Snow was still falling, muffling everything in silence. Around midnight, I woke up to Lila gripping my arm so tight her nails dug into my flesh. She was frozen in terror and trembling. I looked around. The bedroom was dark, except for the moonlight coming through the window. I followed Lila's vision toward the doorway where a dark silhouette stood. I squinted and immediately recognized her as the woman from earlier. She was standing at the foot of our bed, holding a big kitchen knife from the drawer downstairs. When our eyes met, she flashed me a smile, and before I could lift a finger, she screamed and lunged at me. Lila screamed while I rolled off the bed just as the knife came down, hitting the mattress where I'd just been. The woman was shrieking words I couldn't quite make out, something about the house being hers. She went for Lila next. Lila grabbed the bedside lamp and swung it hard, but the woman caught her first. She slashed her arm. Blood started soaking through her sleeve. Lila cried and fell, The woman aimed at her head and was about to stab when I grabbed the first thing I could reach, a cast iron skillet we'd used for breakfast that morning, and I swung it as hard as I could. It connected with the side of the woman's head with a sound I'll never forget. She dropped to the floor. Lila was crying, holding her arm. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the skillet. We stood there staring at the woman's body on our bedroom floor. I checked for a pulse, but couldn't feel anything. Blood was pooling around her head where I'd hit her. Lila said we needed to call the police. I nodded and reached for my phone. Right then, the woman jerked upright like she'd been pulled by strings and touched the side of her head where the blood was running down her face. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched her lick her fingers clean before she dabbed them in blood again and smeared it across her cheeks like war paint. Suddenly, she started laughing. Then she bolted out of the bedroom, down the stairs. We heard the front door slam open. Lila and I didn't move for a whole minute as we tried to process what we'd seen. Finally, I went downstairs. The front door was hanging open, snow blowing in. Bloody footprints led from our bedroom, down the stairs, and out onto the porch. Then they disappeared into the woods. I slammed the door and locked it. I checked every window and locked them all, but we kept hearing her laugh out in the woods. Sometimes it sounded close, like she was right outside. We didn't sleep, just sat in the living room with the lights off, holding the skillet and a butcher knife we'd found in the kitchen, waiting for her to try breaking in again. The sounds continued all night. When the sun finally came up, I opened the door carefully. The porch was covered in bloody handprints smeared everywhere. Some were fresh, still red. Our car was covered in handprints all over the windshield, the doors, and the hood. She'd spent the night circling the cabin, touching everything. We ran to the car. I had to scrape the handprints off the window just to see well enough to drive. Lila kept looking at the woods, expecting the woman to jump out at us at any moment. We didn't stop driving until we hit the main highway, called the police from a gas station 40 minutes away. They went up to the cabin that afternoon and found the blood on the bedroom floor and the handprints everywhere. But there weren't any signs of the woman or trails that led anywhere useful. The rental company said they'd never heard of anyone claiming to be a friend of the owner. Said nobody lived within 5 miles of that cabin. Lila needed 12 stitches in her arm. The scar is still visible. We both took therapy for months. We still can't go anywhere remote or handle unexpected knocks on the door. I was 19 when it happened. My cousin Maya and I had planned a summer photography trip to Norway, chasing sunrise shots in the remote mountains. We'd been talking about it for months, saving up money and mapping out locations that looked incredible online. The plan was to camp overnight, near a lakeside clearing deep in a national forest. The place didn't have any cabins or marked trails. It was only a vast landscape, but Maya was really into landscape photography, and I wanted to get better at it. We hiked for about 3 hours to reach the spot. The clearing was beautiful, tucked between dense trees with the lake stretched out in front of us like glass. The sun was starting to sink lower, casting everything in that golden late afternoon light. As we started setting up camp, Maya pointed to something from a tree branch about 20 feet away. It was a torn jacket, covered in dried mud. Looked like it had been there for a while. I walked over to check it out. The fabric was stiff and weathered, like it had been through rain and sun multiple times. I figured some hiker had lost it, maybe weeks or months ago. Maya said we should leave it in case they come back looking for it. It made sense, so we did. We got the tent set up just as the sun started disappearing behind the mountains. The temperature dropped fast. Maya pulled out our camping stove, and we started cooking dinner by the fire we'd built. The instant noodles and canned soup tasted good after the hike. That's when we heard the long howl, echoing through the trees. Maya looked at me and said it was probably just a wolf. but something about the sound felt off. It didn't quite sound natural, like someone was trying to imitate an animal, but didn't get it right. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam along the tree line, but everything was as it should be. I had just moved the flashlight towards the other direction when I saw someone duck behind a thick pine tree fast, like they didn't want to be seen. My stomach dropped. Maya asked what I was looking for, and I told her I just saw something, maybe a deer. I didn't want to scare her. The trails were impossible to navigate in the dark, and we had no choice but to stay until sunrise. But I knew something was out there. We finished eating quickly. Maya talked about the shots she wanted to get in the morning, trying to keep the mood light. I nodded along, but kept glancing towards the trees, scanning for any movement. Around 10, we crawled into the tent. Maya fell asleep almost immediately. She could always sleep anywhere, even on hard ground in a sleeping bag. But I could only lie there, staring at the tent ceiling, listening to the wind, the trees creaking, and the occasional rustle of something small moving through the underbrush. Every noise made my heart race. I checked my phone. It was 2:45 in the morning. I needed to pee. It was still dark, but sunrise wasn't far off. I told myself the person was probably gone by now. Maybe they'd been a hiker passing through. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and slipped outside. The air was freezing, and my breath came out in thick clouds. I walked a short distance to a nearby tree, just far enough from the tent to have some privacy. I was midstream when I heard a soft crunch, like a branch breaking under weight. I froze. I tried telling myself it was probably a bird or maybe a squirrel. Animals moved around at night all the time. But then I heard it again, directly above me. I looked up, and there he was, sitting on a thick branch about 10 feet above my head. He was crouched low, trying to blend into the leaves, but his wide eyes were locked on me. I couldn't move. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. We stayed like that for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Then something in me snapped and I bolted back to the tent, nearly tripping over a root. I yanked the zipper open, shook Maya awake, and whispered that we had to leave. She started to ask why, but I told her we didn't have time. I grabbed our bags, stuffed everything I could reach inside, and pulled her out of the tent. We ran. I kept my flashlight off, navigating by memory and moonlight. Maya stumbled behind me, asking what was happening, but I didn't answer. I just kept moving, glancing back over my shoulder every few seconds to see if anyone was following. I didn't see him, but I felt him watching. We didn't stop until we reached the main trail, and then kept going until we found the parking lot where we'd left the car. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. Maya finally asked what happened. I told her I'd seen someone, that he'd been sitting in a tree, watching us. She went pale and couldn't stop trembling until we reached the nearest town and checked into a cheap motel. I didn't sleep. Maya tried, but I could tell she was freaked out too. We left Norway the next day without getting a single sunrise shot. 3 months later, I was scrolling through the news and saw a headline that made my blood run cold. A group of college students had been found murdered in their sleep during a camping trip in the same area where Maya and I stayed. Only one of them survived. The article said the survivor told police they'd seen a man climbing down from a tree with a hatchet. He'd attacked them in the middle of the night, one by one, while they slept. Maya called me that same day. She'd seen it too. I never went back to that area. Maya gave up landscape photography after that, said she couldn't look at nature the same way anymore. Yet, I still wonder what ifs, and each scenario makes dread crawl up my neck. I was driving from a work conference in Salt Lake City when the storm hit. It was one of those violent summer thunderstorms that turns day into night and makes the highway feel like you're driving through a car wash. My Honda started sputtering around mile marker 43. The car coughed twice, then died completely. I coasted onto the shoulder and sat there watching sheets of rain hammer on the windshield. I could barely see 20 feet ahead, and of course, the phone had lost cell service. I squinted a little at the downpour, and I spotted a single light off to the right. Looked like it was maybe a quarter mile up the road. I had two options: sit in a dead car in a lightning storm, or make a run for it. I grabbed my jacket and bolted. By the time I reached the place, I was soaked through. It was an old roadside cottage with a stone foundation, wooden shutters, and a porch light that flickered every time thunder rolled overhead. I knocked hard on the door, hoping someone was actually home. The door opened slowly, and an old man peeked through the crack. He was thin as a rail, with hollow eyes that seemed to sink into his skull. He looked me up and down without saying anything for a moment. I told him my car had broken down, asked if I could use his phone. He nodded and stepped aside, letting me in. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrow, said he didn't get many visitors, especially not in weather like this. The inside of the cottage matched the outside, all dark wood and old furniture that creaked when you walked. The air smelled damp and floral, like old perfume that had been sitting out for too long. Mr. Harrow offered me a towel and some coffee. I thanked him and asked about the phone. He said the landline was down because of the storm, but I could stay the night if I wanted to. Apparently, he had a spare room upstairs. I didn't love the idea of spending the night in a stranger's house, but it was safer than sleeping in a dead car during a lightning storm. So I accepted. Mr. Harrow led me upstairs rather slowly, one hand on the railing the whole way. At the top, he opened a door to a small bedroom. Inside was a single bed, an old wooden dresser, and a window with thin curtains that fluttered even though the panes were closed. He stopped and turned to me. He said the room used to belong to his daughter. She got sick and spent the last of days in the same room. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Then he added something that made my skin crawl. He told me to not move anything in the room, and that even a minor intrusion upsets her. I asked what he meant, but he just smiled weakly and left, closing the door behind him. The room had that smell of damp wood and old perfume from downstairs, but stronger. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my wet clothes, trying to process what he'd just said. The whole situation felt off, but I was exhausted and didn't have many options. That's when I noticed the portrait. It hung on the wall directly across from the bed. The woman was young, maybe 16 or 17, with pale skin and dark eyes that seemed to stare at me. The frame was ornate, probably antique. The painting itself looked old, the kind where the eyes follow you no matter where you move. I tried to ignore it as I lay down and closed my eyes, but every time I opened them, she was right there. After an hour of lying there wide awake, I couldn't take it anymore. There was a red scarf draped over a hook by the window. I grabbed it, walked over to the portrait, and covered her face completely. Finally, I could breathe. I climbed back into bed, and this time, exhaustion won. I fell asleep almost immediately. I don't know how long I was out. It could have been an hour, or it could have been 3. But something like a shift in the air woke me up. I opened my eyes. The room was dark, except for brief flashes of lightning that lit everything up in quick, harsh bursts. And in one of those flashes, I saw the figure standing in the corner of the room. She was tall, still, draped in shadow, and around her neck, she was wearing the red scarf. My heart stopped. I couldn't move. I just stared at the silhouette, waiting for another flash of lightning to prove I was seeing things. It came, and she was still there with her head tilted slightly to the side. I screamed. The door flew open. Mr. Harrow stumbled in, flipping on the light. He looked around the room frantic and asked what had happened. I pointed to the corner, but there was nothing there. He told me I must have been dreaming. Said people hallucinate when they're tired and stressed. But I knew what I saw. I didn't argue, just grabbed my jacket and told him I was leaving. He tried to convince me to stay, saying the storm was still bad. But I didn't care. I'd rather take my chances in the freezing car. I ran down those stairs and out the front door without looking back. Spent the rest of the night in my car, doors locked, eyes wide open. Every time I started to drift off, I'd jolt awake, convinced I'd seen her outside the window. When the sun finally came up, I got the car towed to the nearest town and caught a bus the rest of the way home. I never told anyone what happened. What would I even say? That I saw a ghost in the corner of the room wearing a scarf I'd used to cover her picture? People would call me insane. But I know what I saw. And I know I'll never drive that highway again. My brother Jack was 8, and I was 11 when it happened. We shared a bedroom upstairs. It had bunk beds. Mine was the top one, and Jack had the bottom. Our grandma had been staying with us for a few weeks. She'd been sick, and Mom and Dad wanted to keep an eye on her. She slept in the guest room down the hall from ours. That night, I'd gone to bed around 9. Jack always fell asleep before me. I was half awake when I felt someone shaking my shoulder. It was Jack. He was dangling on the ladder and looked wide awake and worried. I asked him what was wrong. He told me Grandma had been calling us for the last half hour. I rolled over, told him he was dreaming. Grandma was sick and was probably dead asleep, but Jack insisted he'd heard her voice, clear as anything, coming from downstairs. She wanted us to come down. I told him to go back to bed and close my eyes. But then I heard Grandma calling our names from somewhere downstairs. She wanted us to come down. She said she had toys for us and some surprises she'd picked up. I sat up in bed. Something about her voice felt wrong. It was too cheerful and sing-songy. Grandma wasn't like that, even when she was all healthy. Sickness had made her voice frailer. Jack looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I told him to stay in the room while I checked it out. I climbed down from the bunk and opened our bedroom door. The hallway was dark except for a nightlight near the bathroom. I could still hear the voice. "Come down, sweethearts. I have a surprise for you." It was clearer now. She kept saying our names and telling us to come down, that she had something special for us. I walked toward the stairs. My bare feet were cold on the hardwood floor. I was only 10 feet away from the staircase, and the phone in my parents' room rang. Their door was open, and everything was dark inside. I ran down the hall and flipped on the light. The bed was empty and made, like they hadn't slept in it. My stomach dropped. The phone rang again. I grabbed it off the nightstand and answered. It was my mom. She sounded rushed and asked if Jack and I were okay. Said they'd tried calling earlier, but the line had been busy. I told her we were fine, asked where they were. She said they were at the hospital. Grandma had a sudden heart attack earlier that night, right after we'd gone to bed. They rushed her to the ER. They didn't tell us this because they didn't want to wake us up. She told me our uncle was on his way to stay with us for the night. Should be there any minute. She specifically asked us to lock our bedroom door and stay put until he arrives. I stood there holding the phone, my hands shaking. If Grandma was at the hospital, then who was calling us from downstairs. Mom asked if I was still there. I told her yes, but my voice cracked. She asked what was wrong. I didn't know how to explain it. I told her someone was downstairs who sounded like Grandma. They had been calling our names for the past half hour. There was silence on the other end. Then Mom told me to hang up, go back to our room, lock the door, and call 911. She said she and Dad were leaving the hospital right now. I hung up and ran back to our room. Jack was standing by the door, waiting. He asked what was happening. I told him to get in bed and that we needed to lock the door. His face went pale. He asked questions, but I ignored all of him and simply locked the door and grabbed my phone from the nightstand. That's when the voice came again, but this time it was right outside our door. She asked why we were being so difficult and told us to open the door, that she just wanted to see us. Jack climbed into my bunk with me. We pressed ourselves against the wall, as far from the door we could get. I called 911, told the dispatcher someone was in our house who was pretending to be our grandma, that our parents weren't home. She told me to stay on the line till the officers come. The voice kept talking, asking us to open the door, and that we were being bad boys for not coming down. Then the doorknob turned. We watched it twist slowly. They were testing the lock. Jack grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. I held the phone against my ear, telling the dispatcher that they were about to break in. The doorknob stopped moving. The voice went quiet. 5 minutes later, we heard sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the window. The police arrived and searched the house. They found the back door open. Someone had just walked in. My parents got home 20 minutes later. Mom came straight to our room and held us both while Dad talked to the police downstairs. The next morning, we asked what had happened, who the woman was. Did the police find them? Mom said that it was probably just some thief. Jack asked how the woman knew our names if it was some random burglar. Mom didn't have an answer for that, so she changed the subject. Dad wouldn't talk about it at all. Just said it was over and we were safe now. We moved 6 months later. Mom said it was because Dad got a new job, but Jack thought it was because of that night. I agreed with him. I'm 28 now. Jack is 25. We still talk about it sometimes, usually late at night when we're visiting each other. He swears our parents knew who it was. I asked Mom about it again last year over dinner. She gave me the same answer she'd given when I was 11. I know she's lying. I wish I could know why. When I was 17, I worked a late shift at an ice cream shop in a small seaside town. The place was right on the boardwalk, one of those tourist spots that stayed busy during summer, but pretty much died after Labor Day. By October, most nights, I was the only one closing. My manager usually left around 9, and I'd handle the last hour alone. That particular night, the fog rolled in so thick you couldn't see more than 20 feet in one direction. The boardwalk lights created these weird halos in the mist, and everything felt muted and distant. I locked the front door around 10:30 and started my walk home. It usually took about 20 minutes, following the boardwalk down to the marina, then cutting through a few residential streets. The boardwalk was empty, except for one guy near the pier. He was tall, wore a dark hoodie with the hood up, and a baseball cap so low you couldn't see his face. He was packing up his gear, wrapping a fishing line around a reel. So I took him to be another fisherman and just walked past without thinking much about it. A few minutes later, I heard heavy footsteps behind me, matching my pace exactly. I glanced back. The fisherman was there, about 15 feet behind me, hands in his pockets. He left all his gear at the pier. That felt weird, but I told myself he was probably just heading in the same direction. In a small town, Everyone walked the same streets. But then he started talking about random stuff, like if I were a local and lived nearby. His voice was calm, like he was trying very hard to sound casual. I answered in one word and kept walking, but he wouldn't shut up or move the other way. Instead, he started asking more questions, like if I always closed up the shop alone, if it were just me most nights. My stomach tightened. I gave him a vague answer about my manager staying late most nights. Honestly, I didn't want him to know I was usually by myself. He laughed softly and said that must be nice, having company. I nodded and picked up my pace a little. He chuckled and picked up his pace too. A couple of steps later, he said something that made my blood run cold. He said no one was home at my place when he passed by earlier, said the lights were all off. I froze mid-step. My heart pounded in my chest. How did he know which house was mine? I turned around to look at him, but the fog was thick. I could just make out his silhouette, standing there, watching me. I started walking faster, trying to get off the boardwalk into the streets where there might be other people. The footsteps behind me quickened too. I heard his breathing now. It was heavier and closer. I cut through a narrow alley between two buildings, thinking I could lose him. But he followed. I could hear his footsteps echoing off the brick walls. He was talking more freely now. He told me to tell my neighbor to lock her window. She said she was sleeping with it wide open when he checked. My mouth dried. I just wanted to get away from him, so I sprinted as fast as I could. My lungs burned from the cold air, and my shoes slapped against the wet pavement. I could hear him behind me, hear his laughter. He was chasing me. I turned down another street, then another, weaving through the neighborhood I'd grown up in. My house was only 3 blocks away. I reached the front door and fumbled with my keys. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I finally got the door open, threw myself inside and slammed it shut. I locked the deadbolt, then the chain, as I just stood there, pressed against the door, trying to catch my breath. A couple of minutes later, I peeped outside to find his shadow on the frosted glass panel beside the door. He knocked slowly, whistled, and chuckled, but I didn't move. I grabbed my phone and called 911, told the dispatcher someone had followed me home and was outside my door right now. She told me to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and that the officers were on their way. I crept to the window and looked out through the curtain. The street was empty. The fog had gotten thicker. The police arrived within 10 minutes. 2 officers searched the neighborhood, checked behind houses, and looked indoors. They found nothing. One officer said he'd probably run when he heard the sirens. The other asked if I could describe him. I told him everything I'd remembered. They said they'd increase patrols in the area and told me to call immediately if I saw him again. After they left, I sat in my living room with all the lights on. I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow outside looked like someone standing there. Around 3 a.m, I finally realized something that made everything worse. He hadn't followed me randomly. He knew which house was mine. He knew my neighbor's window was unlocked. He'd been watching me, maybe for days or weeks. He'd been watching the whole street. I told my parents everything the moment they returned from their shifts the next morning. My dad installed new locks and a security camera that same day. My mom drove me to and from school and work for the next 2 months until I finally got my license. I quit the ice cream shop a few weeks later. I couldn't handle closing anymore. I never saw that man again. Police never found him. They said he'd probably moved on, that people like that don't usually stick around once they've been reported. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about him standing outside my door. The way he tapped on the glass, slow and patient, like he had all the time in the world. And I wonder if he's still out there, watching someone else.
I had a really creepy experience a few years back when I took a road trip. I was traveling to visit my girlfriend, who at the time was in school far away. She had just 3 months left until she would move back home, but I had some time off work, so I decided to make the drive. I did not fly so that I would save money, and even though it was a long drive, I didn't mind too much because I like road trips. So the plan was for me to drive all day, stay in a cheap hotel the first night, and then arrive at her school the next evening. On the first day of driving, I started after I got off work at about 2 p.m. I drove all the way until about midnight, and then I was too tired to go much farther, and I knew I needed to stop and get some rest. I was kind of in the middle of nowhere at that point though, so I just looked for any kind of a city or town. I took a random exit that had some signs for food. Well, the only food there was McDonald's and a Taco Bell down the road. There was also a gas station. But the only hotel was actually this cheap and run-down looking motel that was about a mile farther down the road from anything else. Surrounding it was nothing but the parking lot and then basically woods off in the distance. There was nowhere else to stay, and this seemed fine to me because of the fact that I wanted to stay at a cheap place anyways. So I drove into the motel parking lot, which was almost completely empty. It looked rough, like I said, but it wasn't completely awful. It seemed like it would be good enough for the night. After parking my car, I walked to the office, which was at the far end of the building. There was a man working, and I got a room for the night, which was very cheap. I felt good about how much money I was saving, and I convinced myself that the place would be fine. When I got into my room, it seemed like a standard motel. The room opened straight out to the sidewalk in front of the parking lot. Then inside the room was a bed, an old TV, and a bathroom. It wasn't that nice, but it didn't seem crazy dirty or anything. So I relaxed in there for a little while until I turned out the lights to go to bed. It was not more than a minute after I had laid down to go to sleep, though, that I heard a knock on the door of the motel room. This gave me a bad feeling right away based on the hour of night that it was and the fact that I was at a sketchy motel. I ignored it at first, but whoever was there knocked again. So finally I got up out of bed and crept over to the window. There I carefully moved the shades which had been covering the windows entirely. I looked, and there was a sketchy-looking man standing there outside the door. I couldn't see him that well, but he had longer hair and was wearing a sweatshirt and dark pants. He had a bit of a beard as well, but had an overall dirty appearance. I had never seen him before. He knocked once more, and I moved away. I hoped that he would go away, but he remained there. Finally, I heard him start to leave. I heard him walking off, and I looked out the window and saw him walking away down the sidewalk, and he quickly went out of my sight. He had been at the door for a total of probably 2 minutes. After he was gone, I was really not that tired anymore. My heart was racing. I turned on the TV to try to settle down and be able to go to sleep. For the next 30 minutes or so, I flipped around the channels and was just starting to relax again. Then, as I was still watching the TV, I heard another knock on the door. I was sure that the man was back. I went to the window and looked out of it again. This time, there was a different man there. This guy was wearing all black, had a hooded coat with the hood up, and I could barely see his face. Another sketchy-looking dude. I was definitely not going to answer the door for him either. He knocked again, and I ignored it. Then this guy actually tried opening the door, which was locked. That really creeped me out, but after not successfully getting into my room, he walked away. I was so confused. 2 sketchy guys trying to get into my room. What did they want? I was certainly not going to be able to fall asleep now. I went back to watching TV, just trying to take my mind off of it. For the next 30 minutes or so, nothing happened. Then there was another knocking on the door. I looked, and it appeared as though the first guy was back. He knocked on the door louder than before. I watched him through the window, and he was standing there similar to earlier. The strange thing is that all my lights were still off, and had never been on when the guys were there. The TV was on, but it wasn't providing that much light or sound. Why did these guys think that somebody was here? The guy stayed at my door for longer this time. He knocked again, and I was really creeped out. Finally, then, he left. I stayed up watching TV for over an hour. In that time, nobody came back, and then I was finally able to fall asleep. I'm not even sure how many hours of sleep I got that night, but thankfully, nobody returned. I left the next morning and drove all the way to my girlfriend's college. Looking back, that's something that I still think about from time to time. I never figured out who those guys were or what they wanted.